All right, Drew Ensz, I'm so glad to have you join me on podcast PlainSpoken. I've done a number of interviews. I have not done one yet with a person of your demographic. Let's just see if we see you the same way in this. I would say that you're a liberal, that you've played the role of an activist in the United Methodist Church, helping to highlight what you see as an unjust structure and theology, and providing yourself as a crash test dummy or something to potentially get hurt for the advancement of a cause that would very much be in line with liberal principles. Would you see yourself in that same way?
I would say, and I know I have many friends who, over the last 3.5 years, we've had this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and I really genuinely mean this.
Mm-hmm.
I see myself as a pastor who had two people that said, "We want to get married,"
Mm-hmm.
and they said, "We want our pastor to marry us." And there was a lot of prayer, a lot of conversation, with supervisors and others. Um, and so I think the only thing I would push back about is I didn't do this to make a stand or to promote a cause. I really did this under a lot of prayer,
Mm-hmm.
um, and a lot of discernment,
Mm-hmm.
and just came to the place of, if I said no, I wasn't being true to who God called me to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I know with that is an action as well, right? It is where you're standing for a cause, you're violating the book of discipline. But that wasn't the intention. Was not the intention was not to break the book of discipline. Let's find someone to do this and make sure. It really was an ask, a lot of discernment
So
and
the
decision.
the thing I think I just heard was this was not a manufactured thing. These were real people, a real event
Right.
that just so happens to have been a touchstone for one chapter in the larger drama of the UMC. So let's part of what I'm all about is understanding that issues are complicated. Not too many people who say things are complicated and gray kind of lead to the place of, well, who knows what's right and wrong. I still believe in a black and white. I still believe in a right and wrong, but I believe that getting to that place requires a lot of discernment and energy for nuance and understanding. So what you've already introduced here is that real people are involved, that there are pastoral principles at play, and that people who do what you've done are not conniving with bad intentions, but this is a real issue of conscience for you. So where I suspect you and I will go is kind of looking at the different values that animate people like you and me as we look at these different situations. So before we get into that and the negotiation of all that, I want to humanize you. You are a human, but it's real easy to just see you as when someone doesn't know things about you, they don't necessarily infer, hey, this is a man who bleeds, who cries, who loves his family, who may or may not love his country, who may or may not love his job, who carries a lot of the same anxieties and passions that other people do. So if before we take a sketch of you, I did want to go ahead and say why it is that we're talking, and that's because I reported on you in the context of Bishop Sharma Lewis has brought up on charges 2 female clergy in Mississippi for marrying 2 persons who claim the sexual identity, gender identity of non-binary. And she previously came from your annual conference in Virginia, where you performed a gay wedding for 2 males in a college that you had known in a college setting, I think. Well, we can get more clear on that in a minute. But that she brought you up on charges and then just kind of left you hanging, even though the Book of Discipline says that everything has to take place within, I think, 120 days. It was some stated amount of time. She just left you hanging, and that intersects with themes in my own reporting, where I'm of the mind that the system that the United Methodist Church has designed does not promote justice, and even if it's designed to do so, people in charge capriciously choose what parts of it they're going to observe and not to fit their own agendas. And I've mainly reported on that in the Western jurisdiction in cases that seem quite obvious to me around Bishop Carcano or Bishop Oliveto, both being involved in their own processes that haven't been seen through with honesty and transparency. But in your case as well, even though I would be on the polar opposite ideologically from you on sexual ethics and the nature of identity with respect to sexuality, you and I are of the same mind that what happened with you within the bureaucratic processes of the United Methodist Church is not as it should have been, and there was an unjustness to that. And so I wanted to bring you into that reporting that I did, and in the midst of that reporting, I got most of my details right, but one of the details I got wrong that you graciously corrected was that I said that you'd been brought up on charges before, and that the charges pertaining to the gay wedding were a second charge on top of investigation that was already happening, and that wasn't true at all. You had not been brought up on any charges. What I think confused me was, as you were going through the process, immediately a second charge for the same offense was brought to you. And then I think some of your language in your article on Hacking Christianity indicated that more people tried to bring charges against you in that interim period as well. And so my timeline got messed up. But anyway, you were polite in correcting me, and thank you for correcting me. So we can come back to the story, but let's hear about who you are. Let's spend 5 minutes on just helping people to understand you're a person who has loves and passions and anxieties and concerns. What is it that makes Drew Ensz?
Oh, 5 minutes. I think the biggest thing is I'm a pastor in the United Methodist Church. I have family, 4 kids, and a spouse that I deeply love and who just does amazing work.
A spouse of the opposite sex. She's
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she identifies as female. So, and really wanting very much to do the right things and to love my people. I think like any pastor does, right? Like to really deeply care about people, to help them know who Jesus is, the transformative power that comes with a relationship with Christ. And I mean, all those things. So, I mean, I think that's a little bit about me. The part that I think is a little bit different is being under complaint for over 1,300 days at this point. And that has really, that's a different aspect that I never thought about in seminary, was what it might look like to be under complaint. And in some ways, to, as you very eloquently described in your beginning, is almost become a caricature of myself, right? I'm not a real person to most people.
Yeah, you definitely stand as a certain functionary within this whole setting, as many people do. As well, and increasingly, I've kind of signed myself up for that as well. I'm fully aware that if I do have conversations of consequence, or if my public speech results in anything being different, that people are going to look at me and caricature me as well. So there has to be, and I didn't hear you say this, but you let Bishop Lewis know before you performed the ceremony that you were going to perform the ceremony, and then after you performed the ceremony, you also let her know that you had done it. So you knew. I watched an interview you did with, I think it's like Virginians for Change or something like that. And I watched that last night, and you knew that there would be consequences for actions on the other side of this. You knew what the Book of Discipline said. So it was not a manufactured thing that took place. However, once you participated in it, you knew that you would become an avatar for something. As crude as that can be, that's something that you signed up for. And then you've been willing to do interviews since then. What I would infer from that is out of a hope that others will humanize you and see that the people who do these things are not nasty, evil, conniving people with bad intentions, but people who have a heart for others. And that's why I hear you at this point saying, I'm first and foremost a pastor. I have pastoral concerns. I want to love and care for people. Would that all fit how you understand yourself to be?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not a PR spin. I mean, that really is who I am. And I would also just put out there too, at the beginning, we didn't do any interviews. We didn't do all those things, but it really was the concern around silence and confidentiality.
When you say
And
we, who's we?
so when this happens,
Yeah.
typically there's an advocate that comes in. We have a defense team that works with us to make sure we know the book of discipline. We understand the process.
That's
that is
from the
coming out.
denomination. The denomination sends you people. The conference sends you people.
The majority of people were from Virginia. So again, an advocate, some other individuals, we had conversations with others. We did not, we had somebody help us, again, from a process standpoint, but the rest of it was all here in Virginia.
Well, so wait, I'm trying to figure out if there was an official denominational process that assigned you an advocate and someone to lead you through, or if this was like Reconciling Ministries Network or some other like coalition that is not part of the UMC structure that is gathered around you.
No, it's all denominational, but within Virginia. So an advocate is just an elder in full connection.
Okay.
In Virginia, and I chose one. And
okay.
So
when you're saying we made these decisions, we didn't do interviews at first, you're talking about an advocate that was assigned to you from the annual conference, as well as some other functionaries within the UMC structure that have been designed to walk you through this process, designated to walk you through this process.
Right, and they're not assigned, they're chosen by me as the respondent.
Okay, so they weren't chosen by the conference. They said, you have this option of assembling this team with representatives from our annual conference. Pick and choose who you like, and you chose your dream team.
Right.
And when you get together, you say, hey, dream team, here's what we're going to do. And they say, okay, we're going to do interviews. We're not going to do interviews. Here's the right step. And they've been doing this for, you said 15,000 days, 1,500 days, 1,500 days? 1,300 days. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and it always was my choice, right? Like, I mean, everyone said it's up to you. Mm-hmm. And I just remember, I mean, from a leadership standpoint, interviews back someone into a corner. And they're embarrassing.
Interviews are?
I think so. I think when you go public with your information, it puts out a story instead of, I mean, I think that's why Jesus said when you work through conflict, go to the person first, right? Don't go to everyone, because once you get more people involved, then it's harder sometimes to really figure things out. I mean, if I have a problem with you, I can go and have a conversation with you and we probably could hash it out, versus going to news outlets and others. And especially early on, we were, again, I say we, but it's ultimately my choice. Mm-hmm. I said, I don't want to do that. I want to really work out something.
Well, yeah, and that let's put a pin in that, because I do want to talk about one of the things you pushed back on was the first person who filed the complaint against you was a friend, and the way I portrayed that was a manipulation of the system so that you could easily reach a just resolution without any punishment really coming upon you. And you said that's really not how it was. So I want to come back to that. Before that, I want to circle back around to who you are, and let me just cover basic things that make it easier for me to identify with you. How old are you, Drew?
38.
You're 30. So am I. That's crazy. So you graduated high school in 2003?
That's right.
Where'd you go to high school?
An all-boys Catholic high school, Calvert Hall College.
No, that's crazy. So you did they walk you through a Roman Catholic catechism or anything? Did they catechize you at all?
Oh, I mean, I had to go through religion classes and that, but I was the head of the student ministry program there as the United Methodist.
So you grew up, were you Cradle United Methodist, grew up in the, okay.
Yep,
so
Cradle United Methodist.
You grew up, same experience as me in going to youth group every week, going to summer camp every summer. So one of the things that I'll hopefully remember to return to is what makes one a United Methodist. Someone like me would say it would be assent to our doctrines and discipline. But someone like you might say, well, no, it's not just that. It's having lived within the United Methodist Church for some time and being formed by the United Methodist Church. So we'll see if we come back around to that, because I think there's a robust conversation to have around that too. So you went to high school at a Roman Catholic all-boys high school where they were tolerant of a Protestant like you, and you were actually given a leadership capacity in the religious life of that school. You graduated in '03. Did you go directly to undergrad?
Well, I want to tell a quick story about that.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
There's a funny story. So I was the head, again, of what they call the Lasallian Youth. And as a Methodist, and so one day they go, hey, we need you to go pick up the sacramentary. And I'm like, oh. So, being a 17-year-old kid, you're like, okay, I guess I can figure out what that is.
Yeah.
Sacrament. So I open up the tabernacle and look in. I'm like, oh, I can't. I don't know what's in here. So I go back. I go, I don't know what sacramentary is. And they go, oh, it's the book. And I said, oh, I went in the tabernacle. And so they presented me with a $25,000 addition tuition as a fake bill. And said we had to clean it because a Protestant went into the tabernacle. But I mean, everyone was super kind. And
for the Protestants watching, tabernacle is not akin to the Old Testament tabernacle. It's a little box on the wall where they keep the host.
The excess host, yeah.
The bread. It's not bread, it's wafers, little cardboard wafers. So anyway, he went into a very holy place as a Protestant, and then the joke was that you had tarnished it and they had to purify it. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, there's Roman Catholicism. I had somebody writing me yesterday saying, hey, I think they're Christians, what do you think? And so that's a whole other, we're probably not going to get into that, but that is a good cultural experience, religious experience to have, I would think. And then did you go to a religious undergraduate institution?
I didn't. I went to Virginia Tech.
Okay. And you got a degree in?
Sociology, a undergrad, or with a concentration in crime and deviant behavior.
Ooh, okay.
Which really helped with student ministry.
Sure, yeah. So you graduated in '07 with your degree in?
'06.
Well, good for you, man. And then did you go directly?
I was an overachiever.
Yes, it sounds like it. Did you go directly into seminary from there?
No, I went did student ministry for 8 years.
Okay.
And then last 3 went to seminary full-time.
And what seminary did you attend?
Eastern Mennonite in Harrisonburg, Virginia.
Okay. And then did you have an emphasis in your MDiv?
I did not. No.
Okay. What classes did you particularly enjoy in seminary, or what subjects?
Oh, this should not be that surprising, but I think the ones that really spoke to me was preaching, pastoral care, lots of spiritual direction. But one of the classes that was most meaningful was Christianity through the eyes of the American outsider. And that class was all about, at various points in time during our history, who was considered less than by the church as a whole. And so reading, those kinds of documents to be able to share, what they saw, about Christianity and Methodism and such was really eye-opening. And I think that that's one of the interesting things that I took from seminary was sometimes, and you've done a really great job of not allowing me to use in language, right? Like things I know what they mean and you know what they mean, but others may not.
Right.
Because sometimes the in-group knows what all the rules are. They know the ways to do things. They know, in churches, and this is super stereotypical. I know it's not really real, but what kind of green beans we use in the potluck dinner and what we don't, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But then the outsiders have to learn all those rules. And so sometimes they can be a good reflection of, well, is this really what you want to be? And is this really who you are? And so going back all the way pre-revolution, all the way through to current times, it's a really interesting class.
Yeah, I could imagine really enjoying that class as well. And of course, where we stand at our place in the United Methodist Church is partly both sides and everybody in between being very concerned about our public witness and how outsiders would see us. And of course, we are not the monolithic church with a capital C. We're just one of many denominations in American
Right.
Christian landscape. We are not the hegemonic force of good that we originally set out trying to be, making big public statements that all of the newspapers were just waiting on pins and needles to report on. We're increasingly just kind of a backwater sect. Even if we see ourselves as big and important in the American religious landscape, we're just not as influential as we once were or think perhaps we should be. But a big part of our concern for public witness is, how do outsiders see us? What do they perceive whenever they read about us in the paper or they see the ministries of a local church in their town with the cross and flame on it? So the place I wanted to end our conversation today was talking about the denomination as a whole and what you think should happen and all that. We'll see if we get there. But just to wrap up the section on you personally, you got out of undergrad. When you got out of undergrad, did you know that you were going to go into campus ministry, or is that something that just kind of happened?
So I've always had a heart for younger people, right? Middle school, high school, college students, young adults.
Yeah.
I was an associate pastor for 2 years, and my job was to work with youth and young adults.
Where were you an associate pastor?
I'm sorry?
Where were you an associate?
Smithfield, Virginia. So if you enjoy
In a
bacon,
United Methodist Church?
yeah,
Okay.
United Methodist.
Okay.
So that was my first appointment.
So you were in the candidacy process in undergrad?
No, I was not.
When did you begin as a candidate?
20.
Was it before or after you became a campus minister, part of a campus ministry?
I was before I took my position here.
No, you said you did campus ministry for 8 years before seminary, right?
Oh, student ministry. Yeah.
Student ministry, excuse me.
So youth. No, it's okay. So I was a candidate during that time before I went to seminary.
Okay. So you were part of student ministry right out of right out of undergrad? I got that right. And then were you a candidate? Did you become a candidate while you were in student ministry or before?
During.
During. Okay. And then you became an associate pastor also
After
during
graduating.
student. Okay. And so this was, you always wanted to care for young people, minister to young people.
Yep.
And as you went on that, you were able to go to seminary and study more about that and come up with your theological framework for how to do that. And then that's, of course, what gave you such clarity about standing against the stance of the institution in order to care for the individuals that came to you for care in the way that you did.
Yeah, again, a pastoral focus more than making a stand. But yeah, I mean, I think that was really, really intentional and really meaningful.
Yeah. So the knowing that you're a person who cares for other people, I guess let's go ahead and see how we do with hitting in a place where liberals and conservatives see things very differently. Because, of course, conservatives care about other people as well. They're not sociopaths, and we all love and we all want the good of the other. St. Augustine said to love is to will the good of the other. But we do seem to have very different ideas of what is good for people generally. So conservatives would say that what you did was not loving because it participates in a view of self that is actually defacing the image of God in them and warping love. So something that I think a conservative would generally be interested in hearing from a person who sees things the way that you do is, do you believe that there is anything an individual can desire that is not good for them? Or do you believe that pretty much whatever an individual genuinely yearns for is good for them and should be blessed and given to them by a pastor?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are things, of course, there are things that do harm to an individual, and
even if they desire them very, very earnestly, very, very, okay. So
100%.
So how do you navigate, as a pastor, would you agree that we have to navigate for people what, to some degree, is good for them and what is not? Saying, I can and will and be happy to bless this. I can't and won't and would not be happy to bless this. That's part of our job as representatives of Christ and as people of conscience. We do at times have to say, no, I hear you wanting me to bless this, but I can't and I won't. And I'm actually going to warn you against it. That you would
No,
say
it's
that is
absolutely.
okay. Okay,
Oh, and as a campus minister,
right.
I have to do that at times, right? It's not loving or caring. And I won't get into specific like examples, but there are times when students come and say, "Hey, what about this?" I'm
Hmm.
like, you know, again, I love you no matter what, but I really don't think that this is in your best interest in a loving way, right? But there's the relationship there. There's trust. There's all those things. So
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And we don't have time to get into the nitty gritty on this, but I am interested in the initial response of how is it that you have clarity that some things that individuals desire are wrong, not good for them, you can't bless, but that something that the scriptures warn against as bad for them is actually good and can and should be blessed by the church. What process did you go through to arrive at the historic position of the church on sexual identity and exercise? Actually, I don't think the scriptures speak to identity, and I want to back off from that. I think the scriptures only speak to sexual behavior. What gave you clarity about? Was it just personal feeling? It just doesn't feel evil to me, or was it something more than that?
Yeah, I think that there is a couple of things, right? I would say that there have been times and ways in which I understand scripture that we have taken biblical truths and said, this is one way in which we understood because it was a different time at this point.
Hmm.
And we I'm a very much inspired by the Holy Spirit. I'm not an errant understanding of God, which means that everything is without error.
Right.
For the end until the end of the time.
Yeah.
Inspired is the Holy Spirit inspired people to write. This is the Word of God, but it's up to us to kind of contextualize, and we've done that for a variety of things. And I won't get into the gotcha passages of like, oh well, what about yeah
Sure.
yeah yeah
What about
right
shellfish? We're eating shell.
right
Yeah,
exactly.
we
That's
all
exactly
know
what's happening.
that one.
But
Yeah.
we don't need to go there, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I I think for me, this particular concern of
Hmm.
people, I just look also at the meta narrative of Scripture, right?
Hmm.
God started very exclusive, right, with one family, and went from continuously when people said, "Well, this group is not a part of this." Well, then we have this beautiful passage in Numbers of what the foreigners can't worship. No, let the foreigners come,
Hmm.
right? And every time in scripture that there's been some space where someone's like, well, yeah, but not this group,
Hmm.
God has opened it up. And again, I think there's a difference for me between behavior and identity. I think that's really where it's going to come down to, right? Is
Hmm.
I might push back and say, I don't think that this is a choice. I believe that God created people
Hmm.
in this way.
Hmm.
And just like, Peter and Cornelius, how can I say that something God has created is wrong, is defiled? Um,
Yeah. Do not
but
call
that's really where
unclean
I
what I
come.
have made clean.
Exactly.
And so
And I think that
it's
this is very much God has created people to be like this. And so we've done great harm
so
in not
let me put something
God,
to you that I've been saying out loud, and I haven't had anyone correct me on it yet.
go for it.
But I believe that the fundamental difference between left and right in the United Methodist Church, one that cannot be bridged, and there can be no cooperation between the two, are those who profess the doctrine of the fall and those who don't. The fall being that we are not born as perfect representatives of God's divine image, but that every facet of us is marked by sin, and a death and rebirth is required to make us right with God versus we are born with some flaws, but generally we're made in God's image, and we don't need to die and be reborn or have this hatred of sin, of indwelling sin and of self, and die to self and have Christ live in us. That's not helpful. That's not healthy. What the church needs to offer is the innate goodness of creation and of individuals, and we need to bring out the good by blessing the good, and love, committed love, is a good. And so the job of the church is to affirm, not to do this. You're born in sin. You need to hate your sin. You need to hate yourself. You need to turn. otherwise you'll be damned in hell. You know, that's the doctrine of the fall. Rather, we don't think that doctrine's helpful, and we really stand against that, and we have a very different disposition to individuals that are I think a person like you would say seen as less than by the church. Conservatives would say people who participate in actions that deface the image of God in them. So as I put that to you, that the primary division is on whether or not we confess the doctrine of the fall. Do you think that actually fits with what we're dealing with in the United Methodist Church, or do you think I've misdiagnosed the area of disagreement?
I mean, I think that's a piece of it. I think our eschatology also is a piece of it, right? You name that as well.
So eschatology, for anyone watching, is our doctrine of how we think this is all going to come to an end, if at all, if we are currently in the millennial reign of Christ. Read Revelation about, there's also Second Thessalonians, the day of the Lord, when it comes, how's it going to come? How's it going to work? How's it going to impact all of us? That whole family of questions is under eschatology. Sorry, go ahead, Drew.
Nope, that's good. I was about to explain it, so you did
much better. Oh, my bad. I took it from you. Go ahead. Yeah.
But I do think that has a piece of it as well. And again, I am not.
Well, connect those dots for me. I don't see that yet, but you'll help me.
Yeah. Well, and I think. Well, and let me go back to the whole idea of fall. And I'm not a Wesleyan scholar, right? Like you probably are much more read than I am, but my understanding of John Wesley's understanding of original sin is, left to our own devices, we will fail. We will indulge in evil. We will do wrong things, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is true, right? Like yes, right? Like I see it in my own life. I'm a dad. I see it in my kids, right?
So the Articles of Religion, I think this is helpful. The Articles of Religion, it's Articles 7 and 8 that deal with the fall of man. The phrase I'm able to recall from memory is that our hearts are inclined towards evil, and that continually, without and then from there it's without the being born again or the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit. So that falls within a classical definition of the depravity of man. We put a little bit more on that term nowadays than is helpful, but generally John Wesley and the early people called Methodists definitely did confess that we are born in a depraved state where we cannot be made right with God until he preveniently reaches out to us with his grace and calls us to righteousness. I don't know if that was helpful at all, but I hope it was. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and I just think in general, right? Like, I tend to think that I think there has to be a middle ground from what you described, right? Like, there has to be a middle ground, and I think there is, right? Like, I would say, again, just from study, from lived experience, all the Western quadrilateral things from Scripture, that there are redeeming things, and maybe not that. Yes, that happens, but then God immediately, I mean, that's why we celebrate infant baptism, is this prevenient grace. It's a sign of prevenient grace that God is inviting us and wooing us immediately into. And so I do think that there's that piece of it, right? And then I do think that a part of what we're talking about as well is that the way in which we see things end, or eschatology, deeply determines how we do mission and how we view mission in the world.
So as you refer to eschatology, are you referring to how it is that God's judgment actually works, like who's actually under condemnation and not? Is that the family of ideas you're talking about? Or because I'm still not connecting eschatology with the question of the fall.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it is about the way in which God will judge the world.
Okay.
What that looks like. And I think that is a key piece of this conversation, and what love looks like, right? So, for example, if you say, I won't say you, but if someone says, hey, I'm really worried because I think I've been taught, I've been conditioned, my experience and my understanding and my belief is that those who do not declare Jesus as Lord and Savior are all going to burn in hell.
Yeah.
The most loving thing for me to do is to make sure that people know that.
Yes.
Yeah. On the other hand, if you're saying, part of it is, yes, there is a judgment. Yes, there is this moment at the end times, but God is going to be more understanding. God is going to be more that Christ's love comes, that there's these multitude from all nations, that God understands that maybe you didn't grow up in a Christian household, right? Like, all these things. Then our job then love looks differently in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
And to certain people. And I'm not saying, we're painting huge broad strokes, right?
Well, I think we have to do this. I think we inherit this huge tradition with all these particularities, and we have to navigate these waters and come. I mean, the rubber hits the road. The rubber hit the road for you in a big way, and that's why we're talking. The rubber hits the road for me and you in a big way every day as we make pastoral decisions. So I think it's very helpful to make generalizations and paint with a broad brush, knowing that there's going to be nuance in there. So please don't be insecure about that at all. Keep going.
Well, and I just sit back and go, well, when we do harm to people,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is very clear. If you make one of these little ones go away from me, it's better for a millstone to be hung around your neck.
Right.
Right. And so,
well, if you cause them to stumble, if you
right.
cause one of these, the question is, the little one people outside of Christ's family, the church, who are looking in, and are we potentially scaring them off? I think that's how you would interpret it. Versus my interpretation would be people who are neophytes in the faith and don't really understand things very well, and are we making things unnecessarily difficult to people that are trying to follow Jesus, and then just intimidating them out of the church? So much, there are whole families of theological interpretation here. And so let me put to you another classically conservative understanding of what liberalism is, and see how much you think that shoe fits. And it's not at all, I'll try and give it in a way that's not like, my spirit isn't mean as I do it, but you'll remember in Genesis chapter 3, whenever Satan approaches Eve, he starts off saying, is it really true that you can't eat from any of these trees? And he makes God seem much harsher than he actually is. He's given a much harsher law. And then Eve says, no, we can eat from all of these trees except for that one tree. And then Satan goes, he doesn't want you to have that tree because he's jealous and he doesn't want you to be like him, and he wants you to stay stupid. So he creates this yearning in the heart of an individual for something that's not good for them. And so whether or not the words conservative or liberal have been used throughout history, something that's been seen from the very beginning within the church is a temptation, a desire on the part, not just of normal people, but of leaders, to say, oh, that thing that we've always talked about being a sin, it's actually not a sin. You don't need to worry about that. God is nicer than you think he is. On the day of judgment, he will be much more understanding than perhaps you have been led to believe. And for that reason, we can be much more tolerant of sin and sinful behaviors and people who identify with those sinful behaviors than classically has been done. We really don't need to be standing in fear of this God. So I see that whenever I read the book of Jude in particular, I see it really not struggling, but coming down very firmly against that mindset in the church. Do you agree with me that is an accurate portrayal of the dynamic between conservatives trying to uphold a consistent eternal message versus liberals wanting to revise that and questioning foundational things like God's wrath and the nature of sin and damnation? I think that's what I've heard you saying around eschatology.
Well, and I think we have both in our scriptures, right? We have both versions.
So conservatives would say, yes, we definitely have love, but God's love and his wrath are not polar opposites. They're not at odds. They don't cancel each other out. These are two sides of the same coin. Whereas I think liberals would say, no. Wrath doesn't fit with love, and I choose love over wrath, right?
I think, well, and maybe it's just me, I think God's angry about a lot in our world.
Right.
A lot.
Well, and I think liberals would say that. Generally speaking, I think liberals would say that. But I think generally speaking, liberals would say, but he's not going to damn anyone who is doing these things. He's not going to punish eternally anyone who are doing these things that he does not like.
Well, and I would say that in regards to the LGBTQ plus community,
Right.
right? I mean, that's if we're just focusing in on that. But I do think that there are places in Scripture where religious leaders and others have been have missed the point, and I think
Surely.
all of us miss the point
Surely.
on a whole multitude of things. I'm just sad because of the ways in which this conversation has really done harm, and I would say that both a lot of our more progressive clergy or more traditionalist or conservative clergy would say this isn't good anyway. This conversation isn't great for the LGBTQ plus community. That it is doing harm. This is a theological conversation that has put them kind of in the middle. My parents are divorced, and I remember being put in the middle a lot. It's not good, because what it's doing is it's making people say there's no place for me in the church, and I don't like people talking about me when I'm not here.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the concerns, is we're not really listening to people either in some contexts, right? Like, and that's not to say that people don't have friends and things like that, but on a college campus, our conservative students are more progressive students, because the truth of the matter is we're not all progressive, we're not all conservative. We're usually on a spectrum.
Oh, sure.
This is not their eyes roll when we put people in the middle. When in reality, this is about an institution.
Well,
this is about go ahead.
Yeah, I want to put it to you because you work with the demographic in question here. Are you at all familiar with the work of Jonathan Haidt, The Coddling of the American Mind? He is a NYU professor. He is a liberal. He's a Durkheimian liberal. I think he's got part of the answer. He's not a Christian. He's a atheist Jew, I think. So, but in the Coddling of the American Mind, I think he published it like 8 years ago. It was because starting in about 2012, he noticed a palpable change on college campuses with this whole family of ideas around microaggressions, trigger warnings, all of the hypersensitivities of what I would call far leftism. But he became very concerned about this because it made his job a lot harder. He had to guard his speech a lot more. He could be reported for various things, and there was a new orthodoxy on campuses where if you stepped out of line, big bad things could happen to you. Cancellation, I think, is the word for all that. So the theory he put forward is that starting in the late 80s, early 90s, parents started coddling their kids more out of a concern for doing harm to them. Here's the connection point, the harm principle. And he says, we stopped letting our kids out of the house as young to play and negotiate the harsh realities of life and bullying and all that. We got much more invasive in our school systems, trying to protect kids from unpleasant experiences, certain rites of passage. And what that resulted in is especially fragile people that are not resilient and cannot deal with trials and tribulations of various proportions. And then as they enter into the workplace, all of a sudden we see the workplace also being transformed in order to meet the felt needs of particularly sensitive people. And he makes the argument that that is not sustainable, that we cannot go on as a society walking on eggshells around other people's sensitivities. And we continue to see a revision of unacceptable terms and more social etiquette rules that are continually moving. It's a moving target not to offend other people. He likens, the metaphor he says is peanut allergies are going way up, and it's because we're not exposing our children to peanuts, and so they don't encounter peanut products until later when their body overreacts against it. And he says ideologically, and he would expand it to theology as well, theologically, that's what's going on as well. We have become intolerant of ideas, concepts that make us uncomfortable, and even if it's bad for us, we're wanting to isolate ourselves from that. So as I connect that with the words you just said, having these conversations about people is doing them harm. And I think this corresponds. I mean, I noticed before I got married, people didn't even like labels. They didn't want it, in the dating scene. Are we together? Are we boyfriend, girlfriend? They hated labels. And within the theological conversation, I don't like labels. I'm not a conservative, or I'm not a liberal. I think that there's this whole trend of contemporary America not to like labels, not to be fit within certain categories or boxes, not to be an object of conversation, not to be scrutinized in any way. And I wonder if that's all connected to a very unhealthy desire of a way of being in the world that's just not realistic. We are going to struggle with what the good life is, or what walking with God rightly looks like, and we have to look at other people and other models in order to do that. And when we don't have anything nice to say about a particular model, people who identify with that can be sensitive and say, this is doing me harm, you really shouldn't do that. But I think we need a robust and resilient populace that can stand to do what you've done. You don't seem like a sociopathic person. Here's who I am. Everybody operate around me. You've vulnerably taken a position of conscience where people are talking about you, and you're the object of conversation. And I would like to think that I've been fair in talking about you. Other people have not been fair, I'm sure. But you don't have an option not to exist in the world and to have people not talk about you. And you might perhaps say, well, I'm strong and I can, and I'm in a position of privilege, but these unprivileged people, that shouldn't be put on them. And so I, as the mean conservative, would say, we have no other choice. There is no way to be in the world and not be talked about. And so we just need to model for people how to do that, how to bear that, how to be resilient through that, and how to reflect on themselves in light of that. Because if we are seriously in a position where we cannot talk about people because they identify as victims or as weak, then that makes it so that we can't have any number of conversations that need to be had, right?
I guess my response to that would be contextual, right? That I think sometimes we forget the context in which we live, the context, our history, and the harm that has been done. And I know you just talked about, we're talking generational stuff, right?
Sure.
Like, I mean, if we were talking about race, we would have to go back and look at all these different things that have happened and acknowledge that, red line districts are terrible, right? Like all those things. And I think we're at a place now where we can say, like, yes, these are all not good things, and we need to figure out what that is. I think the difference is, I don't know if we've done that in the church. I think people will say things like, conversion therapy is bad and wrong and should not have been done, or, some different things. But I don't know. And look, we're kids. If you're 38 too, we're kids of that generation, right? Of not being able to go outside, and et cetera, et cetera. I have had to deal with so much less and so many less obstacles than others. I mean, I am ridiculously blessed to be able to go to college, to have generational wealth, to not have people question me. And I mean, and when I was in high school, I went to an all boys Catholic high school. I was called all kinds of names, and that wasn't my identity. I can only imagine what it is when consistently your identity is being questioned, when you're the source of news stories. And I don't think that that's the same as just saying, well, we just toughen up, buttercup type thing. But I do think that there is, I think this is where conversation comes in. Yes, there needs to be resiliency, right? Like, and we try to build that in our family, right? Of things aren't always fair. Last night my son had an award ceremony for his team, and not everyone got an award.
Good.
That's the way it works, right? Good for you.
Yeah.
Like, you did not get an award this year.
Yeah.
I would also take that as a plus that you weren't the most improved, because that's always like you were really bad. And no, I mean, as someone who won many most improved player awards, I know what that means.
Uh-huh.
But so I think we do that. I think sometimes I wish that we would look institutionally
Hmm.
and have conversations around institutions
Hmm.
and the ways in which harm is being done before we throw like this person under the bus or particular individuals, because those individuals we're all systems of our institutions, right? This is the sociologist coming out at me, right? Society, institutions, the church as a whole,
Hmm.
they're all at play in the way in which we view life, where we grew up, what we learned, what we taught, what we were taught, et cetera, et cetera. And I just think when we're talking about, I mean, and I'll throw the stat that I know you know and other people know,
Hmm.
that religious affiliation and religious connections with LGBTQ plus youth increased rates of suicide. That's heartbreaking, and I think all of us would say that's heartbreaking. I just
So
wonder at some
I'm
point
not
what
sure
we
that
do.
everybody is familiar with
Okay,
that. So the thing that I just heard you say is that whenever persons who identify as gender nonconforming or sexually nonconforming in some sense, when they are closer to a religious community, their odds of suicide go up.
yes.
Okay. Do you know how much, by what increment
Well,
their
I
suicide rate
can
goes up?
I can do a quick look.
And since I like having links on my show notes, how about you go ahead and
Yep.
email me the link to that study as well so that the audience can look at that? And as you
I will look it up. I don't have an exact number, but we'll put it in the show
yeah,
notes.
yeah, 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 we can look it up later. And the reason that that matters so much is because if the presence of one's religious framework is causing death, then if there's a causative or even a correlative relationship with death, then it should cause at least some pause as to whether or not it actually serves the Lord of life.
Yeah. So I don't have an exact thing. And again, I mean, this is the National Institute of Health. So it's not, I mean, I know some
NIH.
people will say that, but that was a quick search, but
Yeah.
yeah, it does.
Yeah. Well, so
And
there's question the source, which I don't like. I think most of our institutions in the health field did fail us over the last few years. I'm one of those. But even so, just because it came from a source that I don't like does not mean that it's false. And so it all just has to do with methodology and how the study was done. But I can't tell you that I was familiar with that before our conversation, and so I'm going to need to look at that and see what the methodology was and how big the sample size and if it was a double blind study and all that, because those things matter. I know the stereotype definitely is that the strict unbanding standards of conservatives does not impact young people in particular well, and that as we continue to be unbending and unyielding in our rendering of the gospel, that we are ensuring our demise, and that if we were wise in trying to get people into the church, that we would stop doing that. Would that be a good way to portray that frame of mind?
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
I was saying that the critique that I think you're leveling is um, young people are not responding well to an unbending, unyielding, conservative rendering of the gospel. And so we are ensuring the demise of the church as we continue not to compromise with the world. And we need to reconsider our stance. We need to be more gracious and not talk about certain sins that people identify with if we want those people to come into the church to be part of the salvation community.
Well, I think the question again goes back to what's a sin, right? Is this sinful? And I think that that's a disconnect. I would say no. I would say if
Well,
God
yeah,
made
yeah. Liberals would
it,
say no, and I asked this question earlier. The reason for saying no, I think at that point we went into not really buying the doctrine of the fall, that people could be born sexually broken, that God could make sexually broken people. Um, But once again, I think you would say that there are sins. Sin is such a thing, right?
Right. Yes.
But to say that even though the scriptures identify a whole slew of behaviors that are sexually nonconforming as sin, that you and others, well, and you would probably say there is such a thing as sexual sin, right?
Yeah. You
But
would.
just being erotically inclined towards a person of the same biological sex is not one of those things.
Correct.
By what is it certain principles that we impute onto the scriptures of if it ticks this box and this box and this box, it cannot be sin?
I think I think the question around sin is always, are we missing the mark, right? Are
Yeah,
we not living out what God wants for us? And that's again, I think the fundamental question is if people are created this way,
and there
if
is
God
no
has
fall,
created
or there
them,
is a fall.
well,
See,
I mean,
that's why I say it's that. I think this is the issue on which everything else turns. Can people be born sexually broken?
people be born sexually broken.
Like MAPS, minor attracted persons. This is a sexual orientation where people are attracted to prepubescent people. It's how they were made. It's part of their identity. Is that a symptom of the fall, or would you say no? Gay people are born that way, but MAPS, they're not born that way. That's something societally conditioned. It doesn't matter if they identify with that in a very deep sense. It's not who God created them to be.
I haven't done enough research on that. I mean, I think that children are a vulnerable population, and so no, like,
So you would say
eh,
that's sexual sin, MAPS, minor attracted persons.
yeah,
So that's sexual sin because it has to do with principles of power dynamics, probably.
right.
Um,
And vulnerable people. But whereas, we're talking about consensual relationships between adults.
yeah.
And I know we can go through like,
Well, and we
all
don't have
different
to. I'm just trying
examples,
to
but
figure out, like, what are the principles at play? Because for conservatives, it's real easy. If the Bible says it's a sin, it's a sin. And then, yes, there are areas where we've negotiated what that looks like and how to interpret that in different contexts in history. But at no point does that make it acceptable for conservatives to say, well, we just get to negotiate everything. And for liberals, it really does seem to go to a place of everything is subject to negotiation and review. For conservatives, there isn't that place. There, you continually have to contend with the scriptures, and so when we're trying to share an institution, the United Methodist Church, and there are some who are willing to disregard entirely and say that they were socially conditioned, and there are others that say no, we can't disregard that, and even if all of society is going this way, we cannot go this way. There really can't be. My opinion is there really can't be cooperation between those two, and then it just becomes a power struggle over the levers of power in the institution. And I think that's what we've seen. Do you also see things in that way, or do you think that there is some kind of? I think I did hear you saying earlier that there is a tenable middle ground. Maybe that was just with respect to the doctrine of the fall. But when we're looking practically at the institution of the United Methodist Church, I guess I hear you saying there isn't a middle ground. We need to understand that talking about this is talking about people's identities. It's doing harm, and this is not a conversation we can be having anymore.
I think that there's space to be able to have a conversation um, that just doesn't. People who have been continuously set apart or sidelined in the conversation. I know conservatives might say, "Hey, that's not the case. We have bishops who identify in this way
Mhm.
and such." I just think that at some point again, I think that there's great harm being done to these individuals and to these, especially to these kids,
Mhm.
right? Who are asking these questions, who are trying to figure out who they are, who say, I've grown up in the church and I love God,
Mhm.
but I'm so confused as to what's happening and who I am. And I've been kicked out of churches. I've been done harm. I've been kicked out of my family. And again, this is anecdotal but I had students who were not allowed to go home
Yeah.
during a global pandemic.
Right.
Their family said, no, you need to be homeless.
Mm. So
That so
I
I
think
think
everybody would be
there's
on the
this,
side of that
of
shouldn't
course,
happen. I mean, it would
of
be
course,
only the most extreme people who would say, "Yeah, kick him out."
of
Um,
course. But I
I
do
would be
think
more extreme than most in saying I believe that the church as a covenant community and a denomination as a covenant community can and should reserve the right to say you're not interested in what we're doing here, and so we don't think you should be here. I think that's the difference between an ecclesiastical body and the government. I don't think I'm a big fan of the civil rights movement because everybody lives here. We need to live together rightly. But when you're talking about the United Methodist Church, we're talking about a voluntary association that is bound by a covenant. And so that's when we're talking about you personally and the just resolution process. This gets into you sought just resolution with a person that already knows and likes you and is on your side with all this. Go ahead.
but that's not 100% true because the bishop always has to sign off on
Right.
it.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So no matter who else is in the room, the
Mhm.
bishop still has to agree.
Yeah.
And the bishop, we knew if we had just gone in and said, "Hey, look, can I get a Friday off and a
Mhm.
6 pack of soda?"
Mhm.
No, that was never going to fly. And so, I mean, so it's not really fair to be like, "Hey, you just did it to do that." And I think that that's a common misconception. The bishop always has to sign off on it,
Is
which is
are you
why it's so
familiar
silly. Go ahead.
are you familiar with any scenarios where a complaint was lodged against a person and the plaintiff and the person that was filed charges against that they reached a just resolution, but the bishop didn't like it and refused to sign off of it? Are we aware of that ever happening anywhere?
Yeah, right here.
Well, so with you, my understanding was that the bishop didn't even choose to entertain the first complaint, but that she worked only with the superintendent's complaint.
It's not true. The first complaint was in every supervisory response meeting we had.
Okay.
And
And the
the
second
second
one?
complainant was as well and withdrew the complaint about 800 days into the
So the
process.
superintendent withdrew his or her complaint, and then it
Yeah,
was only the first. So then in that case, the first plaintiff and you reached a just resolution, but Bishop Lewis said, "No, this doesn't fly with me."
Bishop Lewis actually substituted a new person in 800 days to ensure that a just resolution would not be achieved. Which again,
What was the
from a
title of that
process,
person?
it's another DS.
It was another DS who was supposed to oversee the just resolution process. Who she
He
recused
became a new
herself.
complainant. No, he became a new complainant.
Okay,
So
so there were three complainants in this story.
yes,
Okay, but there's still the just resolution process where the plaintiff and the you and the bishop all together have to come. And so there was a second DS that came on essentially to take the place of the first.
correct.
And so did the bishop ever get to a place where you had reached a just resolution with one of your plaintiffs and the bishop said, "No, I don't sign off on this"?
Yeah, I mean, the original thing was to take a suspension and to go and do a learning activity like for the conference.
That's what the plaintiff wanted for you,
Hmm.
but the bishop didn't sign off on that.
Correct.
Oh, and did she just not sign off on it, or did she say, "I'm not going to sign. This is not a sufficient punishment"?
By having a DS in the room continuously, it was null and void.
Okay.
You didn't have to do it.
Okay.
And to be fair, so our process is really complicated.
Right.
Like
Yes.
their process is really complicated, and
Yeah.
most bishops get it wrong. Most do. I think the difference with
Well, I
Bishop
think
Lewis,
it's so complicated that there's no way to get it right. That's what I would say.
probably,
Yeah.
and the Judicial Council decision that was named off of a declaratory decision, or asking for a declaratory decision
Mhm.
from Judicial Council did nothing to clear it up.
Yeah.
And that's the most
It's not
recent
going
one.
to. I mean, so my theory, yeah, we'll take a step back from theology and go into
Theology.
institutional dynamics. Um, I think that the system is intentionally designed to be Byzantine and difficult, and so that people in power can utilize it for their own benefit without accountability to people like you and me. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think 100%.
So, but then my solution to that, I think, is different than yours, where I just say, get rid of it all and just let bishops directly rule on disciplinary violations.
Yeah, I would disagree with that.
Right.
And the reason why is it opens the door to a whole bunch of things, right? So let's say a bishop doesn't like you.
Yeah, episcopal abuse, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
abuse of power. And I'm okay with that because then you can have black and white. They abused power. Here's the call they made. There's clearly bigotry involved here. I don't think you can have that with the current institutional system in place. I think you can just say, well, there are a lot of things happening behind closed doors that you don't know about. And gee, we have confidentiality at place. So you really can't speak to this. You just need to understand that the people in authority, they have the best intentions for you. It's this very paternalistic thing that can only exist with so if I'm of the mind that this side of heaven, there's just going to be corruption, bad behavior, bad actors, and that we just need that as easy and plain to see as possible. So that's why I advocate for that system. But in your mind, you do believe that there is an alternative system that could maybe be created that would protect individuals from episcopal abuse, and that we've chosen not to do that.
yeah, and I think it's gonna have to come from General Conference to streamline this system.
Are you
And
aware of anybody who's making a recommendation about what that would look like?
I know there are things in the works.
Okay. Do you know? Can you say who is advocating that? Who's promoting
I
that?
don't know enough of what they're doing and where they are in the process that I would feel comfortable naming what that looks like or
That's
who
fine.
it is.
Okay.
But my guess is that at General Conference, I'm hoping that there's legislation that's put forth
Hmm.
to be able to make sure that some things like this don't happen again.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, and it is very difficult, to be fair. I think the frustration is when we asked questions
Hmm.
about the process, we were shut down. And no, I'm not gonna. The constant thing was always, you have a team of people,
Hmm.
ask them. I'm not the expert. I'm not supposed to be the
Right.
expert.
Yeah. Yeah. See, and that
You
sort of
are.
thing just drives me nuts. It just drives me bananas, because I'm a black and white guy. Tell me yes or no.
Right.
Tell me where to move forward. I'll move forward if I can. But if it's, I'm not going to tell you. You need to go knock on that door. Oh, they didn't have an answer for you. There might be another door for you here, but it ain't here. Just
Right.
kill me now. Just stop. Where this is a farce. So I that's the place where I really identify with you, and I hate the way that it's gone. But I mean, so that sounds compassionate, but then the part of me that you probably wouldn't like is I'm very black and white about it. It says in the covenant what we're about and how we see things and what's right and what's wrong. You violated that. So to my mind, the day after you did this gay wedding, you should have been booted from, you should have been defrocked. You should have been no longer clergy of the United Methodist Church because the way I see it, you didn't violate the person who files the charges against you. You violated the covenant that binds us all together. That is not the Bible, but it is, in a sense, a sacred document that we have all collaboratively come together on. Um, and when anyone violates any part of that, it's not just the gay stuff. I mean, I'm talking about infant baptism. When conservative clergy refuse to do an infant baptism,
Sure.
I'm also consistent on that. I think if your theology does not allow for that, you are not a United Methodist, and you should not be in a United Methodist leadership role. So clearly you and I have, well, and I think liberals in general and conservatives in general have a different understanding of what it means to be in good covenant faithfulness. And I think what I've heard you say is, I made baptismal vows. I made vows to pastorally care for people. That's what I aim to do. And whenever the book of discipline stands in the way of that, I have a primary pastoral role that I need to pay more attention to than that. And so someone like me would say, when you became clergy, you said that you found the Bible and the book of discipline to fit together, and that you would honor and uphold the book of, not parts of the book of discipline, the whole book of discipline, and that if you couldn't do that, you shouldn't have been clergy. So, and I don't say that with a hard heart. I say that with the heart of, you clearly have a way. You do not see yourself as a dishonest person who has come to ruin things. You see yourself as an honest person, a principled person who somehow found yourself in this position where, well, so when you made the vows that you found the book of discipline to be fitting with the scriptures and that you would uphold all of it, did you know at that point that you were not going to uphold all of it?
Um, I I did it. So I became clergy I got ordained in I think 2018. And with the understanding of General Conference 2019 around the corner, and believed foolishly what everyone was saying was, oh, this is going to change, this is going to change, this is going to change. It didn't. And so, yeah, I mean, I did violate the book of discipline. And look, that's maybe a small mitigating thing for people, like, but you still agreed to it.
Mhm.
Um, there was some context there, and I think that's one of the reasons why we said, we're gonna talk ahead of time. We're gonna talk afterwards.
Mhm.
Um, the reason to turn yourself into is,
But let me stop you right there, because like if my wife was like, I'm going to cheat on you tomorrow and I just want to make sure you know. And then after she slept with another guy, she's like, I just want to make sure you know I slept with that guy yesterday. I'd be like, we have a problem here. You and I are not okay. And if she
yeah.
was like, well, I talked to one of the kids and she and I reached a just resolution, so really you need to sign off too. I mean, I would not receive that well at all. I mean, that just seems really disrespectful to me.
Well, in that situation, you would still have to sign off on it because you'd be the bishop.
Right. Right. So in my mind, what the bishop, I mean, in no world should the bishop have signed off on a just resolution that was anything less than your being removed from the pulpit. If the book of discipline means anything, then
Sure.
I don't know why she was so reluctant to use the authority given her. I don't know why she kept you in limbo rather than just making a decision. And I would love to ask her that question. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question, do they?
No, I mean, there are guesses. And to be fair, COVID happened in March of 2020, right? So, and I'm glad that we were focused as a denomination on COVID and on the response.
Hmm.
Whether people agree we got everything right or everything wrong, I'm glad my case was not like the thing that
Sure.
people were dealing with.
I just don't
Um,
see. I mean, I don't see how COVID would have kept the bishop from making bringing things to a close with you. I don't see how that would have logistically. She didn't. I mean, in my mind, that would take an hour sitting down with the conference, chancellor, I don't know, the conference lawyer, whatever, figuring it out, saying, "Here's my declaration." Ensz is punished for a year with the minimum sentence. I don't know. I don't know what kept her from. Well, no, she would have had to. She would have had to have a church trial in order to do that, right?
correct.
So that's a minimum $100,000 expense of the annual conference, right?
60 to 100
Yeah.
is the number we were given.
So yeah, that's the other thing that infuriates people like me, where like there was a clear disciplinary violation. We don't need to spend all this money and get all these people together. Just put the gavel down, punished, the end. But that was never going to be an option.
What's and to be fair, in my particular case, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So actually, I probably would have a trial would have been helpful, and that's why I pushed for it. I said, look, if you want to move, let's move.
Hmm.
Um, Again, I'm not Bishop Lewis, but
Why do you think a trial would have been helpful?
so I don't work for the United Methodist Church.
Right. Okay.
I work for an ecumenical campus ministry of 5 different denominations: the PCUSA, Episcopal Diocese of Virginia, the UCC, the Disciples of Christ, the United Methodist Church.
Uh-huh.
And when they agreed to let me go and serve, they signed a document that said I had to respect the religious traditions of all 5
Hmm.
groups.
Yeah.
There is a portion of the book of discipline that talks about a federated congregation.
Hmm.
Now, again, I don't know. People might have said, but your orders are with the United Methodist Church and you agreed that you were going to uphold the book of discipline.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would have argued you signed a document that said I had to respect all these religious traditions. For the 5 are for full inclusion, and for clergy that are in their ranks have to marry same-sex couples, to use the book of discipline language. So
But
again,
I mean, at this point, I feel like I know you well enough. Don't you feel like that would be okay? Like, say a Muslim is doing an ecumenical ministry with
Sure.
some Christians, as weird as that would be. No one would say, well, you need to start praying to Jesus. No one would be like, you're federated with us Christians now, so you need to worship Jesus. Like nobody would expect that of a Muslim who had joined an ecumenical. We would say, you bring in your cultural distinctiveness, we'll work as well as we can together, but you don't have to conform to our different set of doctrinal beliefs, right? Like we wouldn't ask that of anybody.
Well, I mean, there has to be space for that, right? Like you can't work in ecumenical and say, no, we can only do things this way.
You can't?
No, you have to, if it's truly an ecumenical, and maybe the better thing is to look at us. I know the process for several of our traditions on what it means to be clergy. It's different. I'm working with Presbyterians and Methodists.
Mm-hmm.
I view things from a Methodist standpoint, but I bring Presbyterians in to have conversations about what does this look like? If a student comes up and says, I want to be clergy in the Presbyterian church,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going, well, you know what you really should do? Go be Methodist because we're better, those kinds of things. I have to say, okay, this is the process that I know. How can I support you in this process? Even though I'm United Methodist clergy.
So if they came to me and wanted to be a Presbyterian pastor, I'd just say, I'm United Methodist. Go talk to a Presbyterian. Don't ask me to represent the Presbyterians. But you can't do that?
I mean, certainly I say, here's someone else. But again, as the campus minister, that's their connection point is here. And so I journey with them during their candidacy and what that looks like and helping them. So there's certainly processes that are done through the presbytery, but still walk with them. I mean, again, and I think that this is where the space of having a trial matters.
Well, and I don't know, Drew, like how many people is that really going to impact? Is that really the best use of ecclesiastical? I mean, is this why people put their money into the plate? Is this why we have bishops in place to make a ruling on campus ministry role that maybe 1% of our clergy fall into?
Absolutely not. And that's why the Book of Discipline is very clear that the goal is a just resolution and that trial should only be done at the very, the least resort.
But then that puts the bishop in a position of you have to give in to a process that you think is unjust, a punishment that you think is unjust. Otherwise, we're going to waste all these church dollars on you getting your way. And I don't think that puts the bishop in a position of being wasteful and petty. I think, well, so there's that. But the other thing I wanted to say is I think when it's a just resolution process, it fundamentally misunderstands the nature of broken covenant. Because whenever one has broken a covenant, it's not with any individual member of that covenant community. It's with the entire covenant community. And so in that sense, you either have a church trial for every covenant violation, or you have a person designated, like Moses, was, to execute justice according to the covenant given. And I don't think that requires a 12-member group of one's peers or whatever the stipulations are. I think you can just have a person of integrity endowed with authority. That's how John Wesley and Francis Asbury functioned. And when we insist on these larger systemic choreographed movements, then I think that ensures the demise of an increasingly litigious institution. So one might feel like this particular issue right here is worth it. But as soon as you open that door, I think it's called the Overton window, where all of a sudden the whole group shifts and what once was not acceptable becomes acceptable and untenable. And we happen to be talking about a denomination which in some annual conferences, including Virginia, I'm pretty sure between 2019 and 2021, average worship attendance was cut in half. 48%. I did these numbers yesterday, and has almost certainly gone down since then. We're living, we talk about medieval Europe after the plague, where it killed, I think, 1 in 3 people. And we say, these people must have been traumatized. They were walking around, and 1 in 3 people they used to know were not there. Our denomination, that's us. We have lost so much. We are in free fall well, I shouldn't say we. My church is just disaffiliated. I think the paperwork is being processed in a week. Y'all are in free fall, and in the midst of this, we're talking about having church trials that are between 60 and 100K over issues of flagrant covenant violation. It just seems off base. I don't know, I get, and I don't say that against. That's not meant like as a personal assessment, but it just seems like, well, okay, in Africa, the way they talk about us is, here we are in Africa dealing with systemic issues of real poverty, not being able to get things together. We have religious persecution where Christians are being killed by Muslims in northern Nigeria. We have people with open corruption and power abuses. And then these Americans want to impose their sexual orthodoxy on us and tell us that we're bigots and that we're doing things wrong. And if we just get things right sexually, then we'll be the church. And it just seems really disconnected from reality. So but you definitely wouldn't see things that way. You would say, I think, that the sexual, getting our theology around sexual sin is important. We need to revise traditional notions of sexual sin in order to be the church that God is calling us to be, right?
I, you know, all the things you named about things happening in Africa are much more important to me. They are. I am tired of trying to question of this being the only thing going on in our church.
Mm-hmm.
And I think young people are tired of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the LGBTQ plus community is tired of being the center and the focus of everything. I really think, as you named, there are a million other things that we need to be doing. There's disaster relief that needs to happen.
Well, Drew, let me say, I wonder what you would make. Did you study what happened with the Liberation Methodist connection?
A little bit.
So so here's the conservative stereotype of liberals that you are going to dismantle and say, no, Jeffrey, that's wrong. Is that liberals are focused inward on their own stuff, and that far from LGBTQ persons not wanting to be talked about, many have been very happy to be the center of the conversation and enter into conversations happening and saying, you are not listening to my voice, and because of my identity that I've claimed, you have to listen to my voice and privilege it above other voices because of intersectionality. And that far from the post-separation United Methodist Church is going to be a church that is explicitly governed by minority voices, claiming that authority by virtue of being sexual minorities and shaming those who traditionally hold authority, heterosexual white men, for continuing to claim authority and leadership and saying, it's your role to be quiet now. It's our turn to lead by virtue of our minority status. That's what conservatives think is coming down the pike for the post-separation United Methodist Church. And with the passing of the Christmas covenant, I don't know if you know about that, but that's explicitly separating culturally North American United Methodism from African and Filipino. We're going to become, if anything, more insular and more focused on our niche theological issues and less focused on Africa and their issues. So do you think that how off base do you think that's all entirely off base, or do you think that has some real stuff to it?
Well, I think that some people are going to, there may not be as many white men in power. And that's probably a good thing. I don't think it's going to dismantle all, I think that there's going to be a diversity of voices. And I think that makes us stronger. And I hope in the end, when people go, you know what, here's the truth matter. We're not all going to still be the same. There's still going to be a conservative or a more conservative group. There's still going to be a more progressive group. I think we need each other, right? I would look at Congress right now here in the States, and I would say the fact that they can't get anything done hurts all of us. That they're not listening to one another, that they're not hearing what each other is saying, that they're not working together.
Yeah.
I need in my life my more conservative friends. I need my friends that are more progressive than I am. because I can't be a silo. I think that that's going to be the case. I think once we are all so focused right now and hyper focused in this country as a whole
Mhm.
on LGBTQ plus concerns and topics, and because it's what's selling media in
Well,
some way. So it's a
so
cycle.
I would say what's happened is nobody wants to be talking about it, maybe, but liberals want the conversation just to be over. You old bigots of the past were wrong, and you need to shut up now. And we're moving into the future with this shared understanding of all sexual practices, as long as they tick certain boxes, being co-equal. And then conservatives saying, y'all need to stop trying to revise historically understood ethics. We don't want to be talking about this. So I think both are saying we don't want to talk about this, so you stop talking about it. You let our side prevail. And that's how I understand what happened after 2019, because the General Conference did speak and pass the traditionalist plan. And then the left said, nope, you reached the wrong conclusion. We are not abiding by that. And we're not leaving. You're going to have to leave. And now we're seeing that.
Well, I would say it's not that we said that the other, like, I was there. I wasn't there. I didn't vote for anything, but
Mhm.
we didn't tell conservatives that they have to leave.
No.
I think what
They
ended
just
up
said, we're
happening,
not leaving and we're going to do what we want.
well, I think what they said was, we're not leaving, and we're going to vote a supermajority to jurisdictional conferences.
Mhm.
And so now all the bishops are more progressive.
Oh, yes.
And so it became a deadlock. The laws on the books were more traditional.
Mhm.
Those who would enforce them were more progressive.
But the jurisdictional conferences happened after the 2019 General Conference, where that was supposed to be a final say. I mean, the special called conference was, this is our final position. We've been arguing for decades. This is going to be the one to figure it out. We figured it out. And then the liberal minority in America said, nope, you didn't figure it out right. We're not leaving.
Well, but the problem was, it's not a liberal, it's a liberal or more progressive group denominationally, but it's a supermajority or a majority here in the States of those who voted. Now, I want to be very clear, those who voted at jurisdictional conference were the ones, and they created a supermajority in every jurisdiction, including the Southeast.
So what I would say is that liberal progressives organized to create a disproportionate representation at the top of the denomination that does not reflect the grassroots reality of the United Methodist Church.
Which is why I said the voting members, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know for sure. I
But
know.
so when you look at United Methodists across the world, conservative, generally speaking.
Correct,
When you
across the
look
world.
at our upper management, liberal, generally speaking. But when you look at General Conference delegates, they were still connected enough to the grassroots to represent them to pass the traditionalist plan. That represents the majority interest of the entire denomination. But because there were certain liberals in positions of power already before jurisdictional conference, they just said, no, we're not abiding by that. We're not going to do that. And now we're going to use the levers of power to create even more of a disproportionate representation of us.
I would be really interested to see what the numbers were for the US, only because I think in some areas and some conferences, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Some conferences, no. I mean, we in Virginia were passing resolutions and plans. And again, these are voting members of the annual conference,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the entirety of United Methodist here in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to pass resolutions, pass plans. Um, it, I think the problem was it became deadlocked, and my guess and what I've read and things like that is services said, we're not doing this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Take it. We'll go start our own thing,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
more, to their understanding, more, and again, I would push back on some of this, but more true to the scriptures, and certainly more traditional orthodoxy.
Yeah, they would just have a shared hermeneutic as they come to the scriptures. We just had diametrically opposed hermeneutics.
Yeah.
So I think that's the way to go forward, and just say our lens through which we're reading the scriptures is mutually exclusive between left and right, and we're working at odds with one another, and we need to stop that.
But the truth of the matter is, and what will happen
Mhm.
is even in the Global Methodist Church, even in the United Methodist Church, there will still be a right and a left. There will still be more conservative and more progressive individuals. If not in the next 5 years, 10 to 15, I do think that there's going to be space. My understanding of the Global Methodist Church is people can leave if they're not honoring the covenant that's been established.
A lot of people are saying that, but until a new disaffiliation plan is actually, to my knowledge, nobody has actually presented a new disaffiliation plan to replace 2553. So it remains to be seen. Hypothetically, it's possible.
I'm just thinking years from now, there will still be a more conservative group and a more
Yeah.
progressive group
So,
in
but
these denominations.
when you look at historically how institutions in America have behaved, even though there has been a contingent saying, hey, we shouldn't liberalize, generally speaking, everything everywhere has moved to left. American society has moved so far left, even in the 1990s, you could not have imagined things were going to travel as far as they have. So within every group, yes, there is variety, and people are going to take different sides. But the hope of the GMC is to stem the tide of ascendant liberalism that's overtaken United States society, American society, Western society, not out of hatred for leftism, but out of a sincere belief that it will lead to nihilism and death. And that's why I am personally a conservative. It's not out of, well, this is just how I was raised, and I was raised liberal, by the way. That's a big part of my story. But really looking at things like the coddling of the American mind and belief in a sort of societal structure that is being ruptured and nothing good is being put in its place. And with good intentions, I believe that we are, so what I would say is you clearly are animated by love and compassion for your students. But I would also say that my personal understanding of human nature, my biblical understanding of the corrective from God, leads me to believe that ministries like yours, with nothing but good intentions and love, are long-term causing harm to students by giving a false self-image, a false understanding of what brings eternal joy and happiness and right relationship with God. And so conservatives, I think I can speak for all conservatives, and you already know this. We're not motivated by hate and judgment and just a desire to harm others. It's more out of a fundamental belief that humans are born broken, and that when left to our own desires, we cause death and destruction. And what's happening in our society right now is we have a very licentious society where people are giving in to their urges and wanting them blessed, and they're finding lots of churches willing to bless them in sin. And I can't be one of those churches. I can't be associated with other churches that are calling good bad and bad good. And so that's why, to my mind, the division is very much needed. And why, if Methodists are to separate off, we need to put the safeguards in place to make sure that we aren't going through the same liberal ascendancy 10, 15, 20 years down the line. That's my concern now. I do have a blessing in all that for liberals on the other side of it. But before I do that, as you hear me say all that, how much of that is like, what a stereotypical conservative, and then how much of that is like, yeah, he really does see things completely different, and or I don't know what your response would be. What do you say to all that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just don't buy into stereotypes anymore, right? Like I can go to the worst of the worst and
Yeah.
say, oh, it's all conservatives or that's all liberals.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no, and I hear that, and I want people to go and worship, and honestly, as I said, I mean, I live and see the harm that's done,
Mm-hmm.
and again, very. I love our campus ministry. I love our students.
Mm-hmm.
I love telling them about Jesus. I love seeing their lives transformed. I
Mm-hmm.
love baptizing people. I love all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and so I'm tired of the I just want people to go and do the things that they need to do for God. Like,
Hmm.
I think we have lost a key part of our missiology, of our going out and just building up the kingdom of God,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And we've centered a group that never asked for it. And there's multiple times where, in speaking of our society and our desire to embarrass and shame people, where, somebody was involved in a situation that wasn't their doing, and then people dox them and find out all this information about
Hmm.
them and put it out online. They're
Right.
like, why am I getting this?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
feel like that's what we're
You
kind
and
of
I are
doing.
both against doxing.
Yeah, yeah. But that's the way I feel like we've done a little bit in this conversation with not this conversation,
I hear
but
you.
in the greater conversation with
Yeah.
LGBTQ plus persons.
Yeah.
Many of them are like, I don't want anything to do with the church. Please
Yeah.
stop using me as the reason why your church is falling apart. Or, I'm a kid and I'm growing up and I love Jesus and I just want to find a place where I can do that.
Hmm.
And I wish I could tell you my story and share with you. And I know we have these stories, and so I agree with you. There needs to be a separation, but a separation with a blessing,
Yeah.
a decision to not waste each other's time and money. Um, but it still saddens me.
So, to your mind, and you don't have to speak to this if you don't want to, but we had, I should have the title of the document memorized, the Protocol for Reconciliation and Peaceful Separation or something like that. And it
Yeah,
had stipulations in place for a peaceable, amicable split that the leaders involved in it largely abandoned. Well, to be fair, it was the left leaning people on the committee all abandoned, and now we're in the midst of a very acrimonious split where most annual conferences are making it very difficult for churches to disaffiliate. They're charging money to those churches rather than the protocol actually giving them some money. It's a very different picture, and as you say that I think we should have an amicable split with a blessing, I think is what you said. Would you agree that the way we're doing it right now is not good?
I don't see how what we're doing is working.
Yeah. So do you in our if you and I had to share authority as dual kings of the United Methodist Church, figuring out how to disaffiliate, would you be with me in saying we just need to claim the terms of the protocol and stop punishing churches that want to leave? Or do you have that clarity, or do you only have the clarity that what we're doing is not good right now?
I I, I don't know enough,
Okay.
honestly.
Yeah.
I've heard some things and I've heard others, and
Hmm.
I think, I mean, it really feels like a divorce, right?
Hmm.
If you talk to one partner or one spouse, it's you never, on the other hand, um, there had to be a better way. And we should have learned. We should have learned from the Episcopal Church.
Right.
We should have learned from Presbyterians.
Right.
We should have learned different ways of doing things.
Yes.
Um, and the delays with COVID did not help anything.
Well, it helped one side of this. I think it would have gone
Well,
very differently. Uh,
yeah, I mean, I think it would have gone
the
differently,
protocol
and
would have passed in 2020.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But
It
then,
happened the way it happened. Yeah, I'm with you. I think we should have learned better. It happened the way it happened. I have a hard time knowing where the connection points are between different people in the church, and mostly here in Oklahoma. Whenever I speak to liberals, they don't even, if I present to them what I just presented to you, yeah, maybe the protocol was right for the time being, but then you guys started doing all this misinformation, and now we're glad that you're hurting on the way out. And it's just like we had a real acrimonious special called conference last week that I just think was really unfortunate. So I'm glad that your heart hasn't been tainted in that way, where you would have that sort of joy in the suffering of others. I haven't wanted to participate. A lot of conservatives have done this. We're having a Paul and Barnabas moment. We're both Christians. We just can't work together. Let's bless each other and go on. And I haven't been able to do that because I do think liberals generally participate in a diametrically opposite theological framework. And it seems disingenuous to say, oh, we're basically doing the same thing. I think we really are fundamentally doing different things. But even so, I do like the Gamaliel approach when the disciples were brought before the Sanhedrin. in Acts of the Apostles, he says, look, if God is not with them, it's not going to work out for them. But if God is with them, there's nothing we can do to stand against them. And so
Right.
that's the approach that I've wanted, where we just go, I feel like the good guy. I think that they're wrong, but I'm a human and I can be wrong. So how about we split up? We bless one another. And hey, if you are on God's side, then God prosper you and take me down. That's how I want to split, and I don't know how many people can do that when we just feel so clearly we're on the side of right. But that's the blessing that I can offer you and other liberals who now receive ownership of the denomination if the Africans don't get in your way. And so if you're going to take over, if you're going to be if the UMC is now going to be governed by a liberal theological framework in an unchallenged entirety, then if you're on God's side, I hope you prevail. I hope you bring the whole fold under your leadership. I think if you're on God's side, that'd be wonderful. If you're not on God's side, I hope you crash and burn, And I say that not because it's funny, but it's just, I think that's what we all have. I hope you would pray the exact same thing for me, Drew. And I think that's the way that we can model. If you and I are having this conversation and modeling a better way forward, I think that's what it looks like. Is just saying we're at a fundamentally different place, but I see you have good intentions. And if you're on God's side, I hope you prevail, and I hope I don't. Do you think that's a good way for us to wrap up, or do you think that there is a different spin that would be better for us to encourage whoever watches this?
No, I mean, I think that's fair, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not crash and burn, right? But I do think that will be the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where are we, and how is God blessing us? And I really do genuinely mean, because I have friends that have been tied up in difficult conversations at our annual conference. I have friends who are still discerning. I have friends who left. I want God's blessing to really be on them.
Mm-hmm.
And do I secretly hope one day that they come to see my point of view? Of course I do. Of
Of course. Yes.
course I do. Right?
Yeah.
Well,
You're not
that's
doing
the
them
other question.
wrong.
Right.
It is not a wrong thing to want to connect with other people. And
Right.
I don't think it's a wrong thing to want to change other people, because the heart there is to be one with other people. That is a good impulse, So I would definitely not fault you for that.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Drew, I think we did okay at this. How do you feel?
I feel okay.
Okay. Well, we'll see if there's any other. I mean, we could have talked for hours longer. These issues are huge, but I think that this was a good. What I hope for anyone who spent time watching this is that you just get a good sense of people with good intentions just having fundamentally diametrically opposed views, where we don't have to be hurtful and hateful and wishing each other bad, but we can just soberly assess a situation and have an amicable split. I have no thought that Drew is secretly hating me and just waiting to talk trash about me as soon as we hang up. And I'm sure not going to do anything like that towards Drew. But we just are at a decision point in history. And Drew, would it be right to say that we're both praying that our leadership could be more gracious and that we could turn down the temperature in the room in our
Oh,
denomination?
our leadership, our factions. It's okay.
Very
Okay.
good. Well, Drew, before we started recording, you know what? Let's go ahead and stop the recording here. But I started with a prayer, and then I would have you. Let's just me and you. I'd have you pray over us. But we're going to go ahead and cut the feed here. Thank you so much for joining us for our conversation. God bless you, and we both hope that you will engage in hard conversations with a heart of peace.